You know, this is what happens when a rebellious outsider politically challenges the establishment regime, in that they tend to get boogeymaned into a villainous caricature in the media rather quickly. Ever since Farage almost single-handedly delivered Britain from the gaping maw of the EU almost near on a decade ago now, and goddamn that makes me feel old, the political class was suddenly forced to take him seriously for the first time, because he had successfully galvanised the seething national resentment and delivered a striking blow against the one world globo homo agenda. No longer the Strasbourg court jester who was constantly shouting limp insults from the pews and into the wind.
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you?
Nor even the one-man band who could only deliver 3.5 million votes and one seat for UKIP the year before. He had now proved that he was a serious force to be reckoned with.
You all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you?
But luckily for his own political safety, he had the good grace to stand down from challenging the establishment and go away in 2019, and instead let the Conservatives fuck up Brexit in every which way they could. And so said establishment elected to leave him alone and tried to forget he was ever a thing. But now, after a decent stint in the jungle and spotting the clear and desperate swell toward nationalism happening all over the country, the man decided to re-enter the fray this year. Well, not after having a bit of a wobble at least.
So I have decided I've changed my mind. It's allowed, you know.
And whilst many might see this as cynical opportunism from Mr. Brexit and the ex-leader of two now effectively defunct political parties, there does seem to finally be some excitement and hope restored in the political system again. Now having experienced an incredible surge in the polls, and in some even becoming the lead challenger to Labour in opposition, the establishment regime has gone into full-on panic mode, now operating the exact same playbook against him as they used in 2016. And of course, like they did to the naughty orange man over in the US, what just loves building walls and not arresting his political opponents and shit. After yet another milkshaking event back in early June by brain-dead bimboed OnlyFans skank, Farage's popularity only increased, not least because the public saw even more evidence of media and establishment hypocrisy, or
fake news,
as Donny T would call it, playing out right in front of their face. Because it's totally okay now, apparently, to lob foreign liquids over fellow citizens if you just don't agree with their politics, and to flat out assault opposing political candidates in the middle of an election campaign. As we immediately saw all the lovies come out laughing and gloating about it, and of course hypocritically blaming the victim for his own assault.
But a good reminder that he is a very divisive figure here in Clacton.
Despite living in an age of casual acid attacks, and through such a turbulent heightened political landscape, that the last time a candidate was politically confronted, she ended up deaded in broad daylight during the Brexit campaign, as did Sir David Amess when a crazed Mohammedan shanked him at his own surgery. So essentially, celebs and journos can laugh all they want at the divisive Brexit guy getting effectively gunged on TV, and also joke without consequence about how they'd rather it be battery acid.
Certain unpleasant characters are being thrown to the fore, and they're very, very easy to hate. And I'm kind of thinking, why bother with a milkshake when you could get some battery acid?
But are the same people who cry about right-wing protesters verbally challenging their right-wing cronies in the street, like that time Anna Salisbury got called out for betraying the Brexit vote and stuff.
Traitors like you were told what the people feel.
You are a traitor. You are a traitor to this country.
And now the establishment is so scared of this guy and his soaring successes, they're launching the exact same scumbag methods to publicly discredit him and remove him from the running at all costs. And given recent polls show he could finally become an MP and even win up to 7 seats whilst totally destroying the supremacy of the two-party system by relegating the 200-year-old Conservative Party into oblivion and even causing the incumbent Prime Minister to lose his own seat for the first time in history, they're now realising how serious of a threat the man actually is to the uniparty rule.
Why on earth should anybody believe the fifth manifesto that promises cuts to net migration?
Because of the record of this Prime Minister. So we've had...
enough, that's fine, I'm happy.
And so this week saw them trying to stitch him up royally by trying to frame him as some sort of Russian asset and Putin stooge. Yeah, because that worked out so well last time. I mean, these people have clearly learned nothing from 2016. They of course did the same to Trump during his first campaign, laughably painting him as some kind of Ruski spy, despite Putin then being too afraid to make a move whilst the crazy orange man had his finger on the nuclear button and also Diet Coke and ex-porn stars allegedly. Yeah, as soon as a sleepy Alzheimer patient got installed, Putin went straight into Ukraine and did a bunch of bad things like he'd always wanted. Gah, some puppet, eh? Anyway, Farage saying in an already hostile interview that the West provoked Russia into invading is hardly evidence he's been in league with the KGB leader for the past decade, especially since he's been on record saying all that since 2014 on Twitter and in the EU Parliament.
This EU empire, ever seeking to expand, stated its territorial claim on the Ukraine some years ago. Just to make that worse, of course, some NATO members said they too would like the Ukraine to join NATO. We directly encouraged the uprising in the Ukraine that led to the toppling of the President Yanukovych, and that led, of course, in turn to Vladimir Putin reacting. And the moral of the story is if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised when he reacts.
And besides, it's objectively accurate. I mean, what do we think was going to happen when NATO keeps expanding outward and talking of bringing Ukraine into the fold? Not to mention all the biolabs on its border, and of course the 2014 US-backed colour revolution that took place in Ukraine and effectively imposed their own selected leader into office. But we won't go into that here on the YouTubes. Anyway, although Old Nye should have seen the ambush coming, it's hardly a surprise that the machine is now in full-on panic mode, trying to stop this guy at all costs. But you would have thought they would have learned a few things over the years about what works to discredit people, and what only leads them to becoming martyred, and indeed red-pilling the public into seeing the raw biases of the media and manipulative propaganda campaigns they coordinate. I mean, this is the sort of shit which led to the Brexit wins, and Trump being elected into office the first time. And again why the Don is also surging in the polls, despite the US media now trying to say, okay, he may not be a Russian agent, despite us having told you uncategorically he was for 4 years with no evidence. But he's defo now a convicted felon, given we convicted him real good and proper in a kangaroo court based on evidence we just made up about some pathetic low-level bookkeeping charge, which itself was brought by a political activist AG on charges years past the statute of limitations in an election year, and presided over by a partisan judge with TDS, and links to the Democrat Party itself. Anyway, the fact that the BBC are now so scared of acknowledging Nigel's success in the polls that they ludicrously excluded him from last week's Question Time's national leader debates just goes to show how much he terrifies them. But according to many social media polls, he hilariously even won that one, even though he wasn't even there. Despite the 2-hour show being full of such quality engaging candidates that they straight up bored the audience into fighting just to stay conscious. Cause this geezer was too busy watching the England match down the local boozer to bother with that snooze fest, and instead hanging out with the real voters and common people of the country. And of course, this is also how Trump built his grassroots base. The electorate just wants to vote for people who seem to understand them, and you can't represent the people's interests if you don't understand the people. Which is why Farage is the only one who talks about culture and quality of life when it comes to the topic of immigration, whilst the others all stand there like blank robots and repeat the tired old lines of supposed economic benefits of infinity immigrants and shit. And this is why populism is rising all over the West. Like when the train derailed in East Palestine last year, for example, and did serious ecological damage to the town's environment and lakes, Bidley old Biden was nowhere to be seen. He didn't even visit, probably because it was a Trump voting red state that he couldn't win anyway. But of course, the ex-president was on scene straight away and handed out free hamburgers to the blighted residents. You know, lefties can cope and seethe about reform surge being all bots and falsely inflated propaganda campaigns all they want, but it's mainly because Farage has a common touch about him and actually goes out and has a drink with the locals, without it having to be pre-arranged by his team for the cynical purposes of a sanitised photo op, and without needing an army of private bodyguards to keep the plebs at least 6 feet away from him at all times. And even after getting constantly drenched in liquids wherever he goes. And he's even getting down with the kids on the ticky-tocky, to be fair.
Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Back again. Back again.
Ultimately, The establishment regime and media machine have clearly learned nothing from creating boogeymen caricatures out of their political enemies, nor how it just always seems to lead to the electorate moving over toward that candidate when you effectively create a targeted underdog in this way. As people further start to become awake and exposed to the corporate lies and monopolist control of the Uniparty. And now we're at the point in the election cycle of wheeling out the old and busted celebs to try and desperately save the establishment skin. I mean, did Michael Rappaport or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson coming out to tell you not to vote Trump indeed make you not vote Trump last time? Did Martin Sheen and that ginger bird from Will and Grace back in the day manage to sway your vote because they begged you not to choose the other guy? And likewise, is glorified teaching assistant and bum Botox Queen Carol Vordenaux telling you not to vote for Farage going to make you not vote for Farage? Or is their smug and sneering lecturing in fact more likely to make you double down and vote for the villainised martyrs purely out of spite and indignation? And to send a message to these high and mighty elitist twonks who think they know better than you, despite never having been intimidated in the street from loitering illegals, or having to ever sit on the top deck of a bus and listen to a crowd of shouty foreigners play music without headphones and screaming about 9 different languages. Well, I for one am certainly enjoying how much the fear of God has been put into these snivelling establishment goons by a flag-waving, chain-smoking bug botherer who got radicalised back into politics after being debanked by the establishment who wanted him gone forever anyway. And long may their ignorance of their own past mistakes lead on to their well-deserved and long-time coming future downfall.